Hello everyone, the time has finally arrived. I've been looking forward to this shmup all year long. Gunvein is here. The first thing I want to say about this game is that even though it is published by NGDev, it is absolutely the brainchild of Boghog. This is his shmup. And so if you're coming into this release with the expectations or prejudices against previous NGDev shmups, wipe the slate clean because this game is a brand new beast. And when you compare the design of Gunvein versus the design of Mechanical Star Astra versus the design of previous NGDev shmups, it is clear who has put this project together. And so Gunvein, it's hard to know where to even begin. First of all, if you're a fan of the cave danmaku style bullet hell, this shmup is going to be right up your alley. It reminds me a cross of SDOJ meets Crimzon Clover meets maybe a little bit of Battle Garegga, something like that. I say SDOJ mostly because of the level design and the bullet patterns. The level design of this game is absolutely relentless. You're going to be attacked from the moment you begin the game to the moment you end the game. Constant onslaught. No downtime, no cute sequence sections. You're just blasting your way through right in the core gameplay as much as possible. And I really appreciate this style of level design. Even the transitions from the different sections of the stages are pretty snappy. So you go from stage to mid-boss, back to stage, into the boss. And these transitions through these sections are surprisingly tight at times, where in a lot of shmups, you give this kind of big, clear delineation between these. So you fight the stage, then you fly for a few seconds into the mid-boss, fight the mid-boss, fly a few seconds out, fight the rest of the stage, fly maybe even more than a few seconds into the main boss, and you have those sort of clear breaks between things. I like how Gunvein really starts to shrink this down. It all flows together so quickly and so well. And at times you're thinking, wait, am I fighting a mid-boss or is this just a really beastly enemy? And I really appreciate that. It kind of reminds me of when you listen to a really good album and the tracks flow into each other really seamlessly. So at times you finish one track and then you're into the next song and you can't quite tell. You're like, wait, am I still in the other song or am I in a new song? But in a good way, where it all just flows together really nicely. And the album is a cohesive piece. And I feel that way about this game's level design. It's just a cohesive experience from beginning to end. No weird breaks, no weird mini games and cutoffs and okay, what's going on here? It just flows into each other really nicely. And then with the bullet patterns, it reminds me of SDOJ because of how thick and dense these bad boys are. So in SDOJ, you get medium speed bullet patterns, but unlike something like Touhou, which are a bit slower speed and they're geometric and they kind of have these very obvious gaps and shapes. And so as you're seeing the pattern coming at you in a Touhou game, you can kind of just see, oh, okay, I need to go here. It's just a matter of timing and figuring it out. In SDOJ and also in Gunvein, the bullet patterns are coming at you quicker, but they're also dense and kind of messy, but in a good way, where it adds sort of on-the-fly decision-making, where it's coming at you, wait, do I macro around it? Do I try to micro through it? Where do I set myself up? Maybe if I'm here, maybe I'll macro. But in another scenario, maybe I micro through the pattern. So the patterns are a little bit more open-ended on what they want you to do, how you deal with them. And I really appreciate that. It gives the game a real spontaneous on-the-fly feel. And I think it really translates well into the main gameplay loop, I guess you'd call it, what the game wants you to do, which is pure onslaught aggression. The game really rewards that, where you go in, you speed kill things, you get bomb fragments, you drop the bomb fragments, you get score, and then you kill things, and then you get more bog fragments, so it's this nice positive feedback loop. But unlike Garegga, there is no ranking system, so you're not trying to suicide or anything like that. I think it really works really well. And what's interesting is that there's caps on things. So you build up the bomb fragments and you get bombs like in Garegga, but they're capped. And then also with the extends, those are capped as well. It makes score play of the game really fun because you can get hella aggressive in the early stages and just go all out, playing incredibly risky. But as long as you're building up enough score, you can offset the deaths and losses with extends. And then when you're coming into later stages, then you can start to back off, play a little bit more carefully, focus a little bit more on survival. And not being able to stockpile a bunch of extends is, I think, really nice because, again, it rewards aggressive play early on without too much punishment, but also it kind of punishes lazy late game stuff where you can't just resource spam your way through the late game. You can't just resource spam the bosses. You actually have to know how to dodge them and how to fight the final boss. There's just no way around it. And I actually really like that as well. That is some of the critique of some cave games that I'll play, like Dodonpachi 1-all, for example. If you learn just how to tank up resources really well, you can just kind of bomb spam your way through the last 2 stages without too much issue. So I really like that style. It kind of reminds me of Zeroranger in that way, where you can build up resources. If you take a death, it's not the end of the world. It's not a reset, but having an overall familiarity and being able to perform well throughout all the sections is also rewarded because you can actually build yourself up even in the later games. So it'll be interesting really to see how the score play of this game develops, because I can see it being incredibly fun to play for score. And I know people were going pretty hard on the demo, so with the final release version out, that's going to be really cool. Now let's talk about the ships and what you have available to you. So you have 3 ship types. Type A, the red ship. That's the Crimzon Clover ship. You just got to call it that, right? I think it's directly inspired by Crimzon Clover. One bit of a difference, though, that I think is going to really help players as they're trying to sort of figure this ship out is in Crimzon Clover, the way it works is if you're not using your locked on attack and you're just holding the charge, it's basically doing nothing, right? You have to be releasing those charges to be doing much damage in Crimzon Clover, typically. In this game, think of like the lock-on as like a Crimzon Clover lock-on, but when you're further back on screen, it actually works like a Touhou focus attack where you actually still do damage on things. So when you're playing red type ship, you don't always have to be right on top of the enemies and constantly blasting them with the lock-on, because that range of that lock-on is not nearly as big as the range of the lock-on in Crimzon Clover. But to offset that, you can actually just shoot things with your concentrated beam and it does damage. So it is pretty interesting that even though it looks like the Crimzon Clover ship, it actually plays quite a bit different from it. It has its own feel to it, especially with the bombing system, right? You're not firing up a bunch of hypers. And what's kind of funny is the hypers in this game are an inversion of Crimzon Clover. So in Crimzon Clover, you hyper for score and you bomb for survival. In this game, it's actually the reverse. You bomb for score and then you hyper for survival. And so if you hold down the bomb button, you actually activate a hyper and it gives you some invulnerability. Usually you can get some screen clearance with it. And so it's a really helpful survival tool, especially if you don't have a full bomb put together. But when it comes to score, it's not nearly as good as just blowing shit up with the bomb. So it's kind of a fun little inversion with that. And so then you have the red ship, very solid, very fun to play with. Then you have the B ship, which is the blue, definitely inspired, it feels like the Dodonpachi C-type ship. It's blue, it has this big, wide range of attack. It really dominates the levels and does really well in levels. But when it comes to the boss fights, this is where this bad boy struggles because, first of all, the movement speed is slower than the other 2 ships. And then on top of that, it just doesn't output the same damage as the other 2 ships. And so when you get into the boss fights, this is actually, I think, the most challenging ship to play. And then the inversion of that is the type C ship, the green ship. And in my opinion, this ship is like the secret sauce of the game. This is the ship that I think is going to be very popular with a lot of players because of the way its mechanics work, where you charge up your main shot, you drop it in a bomb form. The ship has faster movement speed, is a little bit harder to control. Its default shot is much weaker than the other 2. But it has this really OP bomb that it can drop. And if you charge it 1 level, it's like a bomb. But if you keep holding it, then you can launch it like a Hadoken. And I think that's a really nice addition because what can happen with bomber style ships in other shmups is if you get stuck into the back corner, you're kind of screwed because you can't get out of the position because you're just too far away to hit the thing that's hitting you, but there's a bunch of popcorn and crap in the way that you also can't get past, so you end up just getting locked into the corners. The way the game gets around that is if you keep charging your shot, you get to the level 2, then it fires forward like Hadoken and does this massive damage radius, incredibly useful on boss fights, but also if you get jammed into the corner. I actually got a 1cc with the green ship, and it was a ton of fun. So I think this ship is going to be very popular among a certain sect of players that like the kind of more quirky, crazy ship types. and it is more out of the box than a Dodonpachi style ship type. So I can see it being incredibly popular, and it'll be really interesting to see what people do with it. Now let's talk about the visuals of the game. So when it comes to the visual feedback of the gameplay experience, Boghog has left no stone unturned. When you blow shit up, it blows up. Shit flies out of it. You get text feedback, you get like the SDOJ style numbers, you get medals and all kinds of stuff. Like, he really went out of his way to make blowing enemies up feel visceral and satisfying. And I've always said that not having really satisfying explosion animations is an issue in shmups, because the actual visual feedback of blowing something up is actually a reward system. It is something that rewards the player and makes them feel like this is a satisfying experience. And so I really love all the effects work Bog put in with damaging enemies, blowing them up. I mean, it just feels very polished and generous, you know, and I think that definitely is the Crimzon Clover influence. We're talking about Crimzon Clover. Not only is the shot type similar to Crimzon Clover, and I think that's a good thing. I think more shmups should take a leaf out of Crimzon Clover's book when it comes to explosions and visual feedback, especially when it ties into the mechanics of the game. And I don't know what it is, but Boghog shmups, whether it's Astra or Gunvein, they have this sort of bouncy quality to the visuals. It's hard exactly to describe, but it feels like everything's kind of got this jaunty bounce to it, and it feels very playful and alive. I really like it. I'm not exactly sure what he does to accomplish this. And then we have the modes of the game, and holy crap, this section of video could go on and on, but he is not holding back. So you have the main story mode of the game where you can go through, and it's kind of like a pseudo stage select as well, where you can start in stage 1, you can just go through the whole thing and go for a 1cc. But when you die in the story mode of the game, you actually can buy things in the shop system, in the continuation system, so that, okay, I'm struggling in this section, I can buy some upgrades. I think newer players are really going to like this. I think this is a really fun way to do continuation systems, because I've been saying across a lot of shmup reviews that the old days of the cave style continuation system, where you can just literally credit spam your way through the game, that just doesn't work anymore, especially with indie shmups. You don't even have an arcade history to even back that up. I really like the way he does the continuation system of this game, where your points can convert into actual like survival tools when you die and you're struggling. I think newer players are really going to like this. And then of course, if you want the more straightforward arcade experience, get onto the leaderboards. 1 credit. If you die, you're out. He has the arcade mode. I think that's essential. So really glad he got that in there. And then of course, a real unique aspect of this game that I haven't seen in other shmups that I can think of, like traditional style shmups, is a roguelike mode. And it's really fun, I think. And I think a lot of players will just play this mode maybe a little bit more than even the arcade mode or story mode. So the way it works is you can go in and you can change a bunch of the parameters in the roguelike mode, like the spawn rate, of course, the difficulty selection, what ship type you use. You can either use the main ships, or you can use this cool custom ship that as you're going along, it gains power-ups from other ships, and then you can kind of upgrade it. I think players who are big fans of roguelike, Enter the Gungeon, twin stick shooter stuff, they're going to really enjoy these aspects of the mode. And what makes it fun is that it has this sort of random element to it, where it randomizes the enemies and the spawns, and you can change that. But it's not full on just pure chaos where it makes no sense anymore. And it can get kind of funny too, because the way the balance works is if you go in, for example, into mild mode and you turn up the spawn rate super high. I'm a big fan of this. Basically, you go into mild, so it's not super hard in terms of aggressive enemies. Then you turn up the spawn rate super high, so you just get shitloads of enemies on screen, and you're blowing them up in these crazy waves. And I really like it. And it's kind of funny because then the boss fights are still mild difficulty, so like the boss fights are actually the easiest part. Then of course, if you turn this bitch up on standard mode, it gets wild. And then intense mode, extreme mode, whatever it's called, you go full spawn rate on extreme mode. I want to see that happen. That's like a Futari Ultra type stuff. At least it seems that way. That would be absolutely crazy. So I think this mode is going to add a ton of replayability to the game, and maybe attract players who maybe aren't as a big fan of the traditional arcade let's grind out 1cc's. you still want to give them fun, meaningful gameplay that isn't sort of bogged down in Euro shmup land. And for example, like feedback in my recent Euro shmup video, they said, well, what if you took the merits of a Euro shmup? What would that look like? I think this roguelike mode would be kind of my answer to that, where you're still following the design principles of what makes arcade shmups fun, but you're adding in that extra flavor that everyone likes about Euro shmups, like power-ups and customization and all that sort of thing. So you're getting best of both worlds. Though, in all honesty, I probably will still play the arcade mode the most because that's my nature, but I can see this mode being a ton of fun. And then there's missions you can go into. Personally, I'm going to admit that I'm not much of a missions player, just like in any shmup, but again, more stuff that people who enjoy trying to get into the genre that don't necessarily want to go full arcade mode style. This is more content that I think people can dig into that can help funnel them into that style of gameplay. And so with all of this extra stuff, I think Gunvein is a really strong contender for another really good introductory shmup into the genre. And I know Boghog went out of his way to add in all these different tutorials to teach you how to play the genre. So if you want to get into Crimzon Clover, if you want to get into the later cave games, if you want to get into really intense danmaku, I think Gunvein, not only does it provide it in its own gameplay, but also with all these extra tutorials and modes and features, I think it's a really cool funnel into that. And as far as the overall difficulty of the modes, I think it hits a nice sweet spot where the mild mode is easy, but it isn't dumb easy. It's not like insultingly easy where it's not even fun to play for newer players. So if you're a newer player, I think the mild mode is going to be a nice introduction into bullet hell, like I was saying. And then intense mode, I think it's called, that's going to give you your arcade basic difficulty. And so I'd say it's easier than a Crimzon Clover arcade 1cc, which can be pretty brutal. And then the extreme mode, the hardest difficulty, yeah, definitely much more challenging than arcade 1cc of Crimzon Clover, but probably easier than Crimzon Clover unlimited difficulty. So again, it's kind of a step down from that. I think I can get the 1cc of this, but it is actually going to take time and practice, and the game is really fun to practice. Has a really solid training mode, by the way, giving you all the stuff that you need. And if you want to specifically fight the TLB and practice the TLB, there is a mission where you can do that. And of course, this is a very positive review, but I do have some critiques of the game. First of all, the backgrounds, I hate to say it, they're not bad or anything, but they just seem a little bit bland, a little bit stale, especially when you have all these amazing effects and shit going on the foreground. Then on the background, they're just kind of a little bit more generic plotting. Sometimes the background doesn't feel like it flows into the foreground. I know that's very hard to get lined up, but that would be one critique, especially when you compare it to something like Crimzon Clover's backgrounds, which are really epic and cool and just iconic, right? The stages of Crimzon Clover are incredibly iconic when you look at the backgrounds, like the sky stage and then the final stage in the city. And I think the stages of this game look good, but I don't think they quite have that same iconic, eye-catching, oh, I'll remember this forever, Garegga, the thunder stage, So I would say definitely the backgrounds could have been improved. And then similarly, even though the models of the game look good and the effects of the game look good, the animations, I think, are a little bit limited. They're not quite fully cave level stuff. When you shoot a tank in cave, there's all these different variations in the sprite and like the damage and what they look like when they're damaged. And in this game, it's a little bit more static. I think that would have been a really nice extra layer of polish when it comes to the visuals. So I think the presentation of the game is very good. I just don't think it quite reaches that Crimzon Clover cave tier because of the backgrounds and because of a little bit of lack in the animations and the different variations of the sprites. And so overall, what are my final conclusions of Gunvein? Of course, if you are a shmup fan, I think you absolutely need to pick the game up. Essential purchase in my book, especially if you're a danmaku fan, because I think it's coming real close to Cave in terms of quality. And let us remember, Cave doesn't make these types of games anymore. We might not even see another Crimzon Clover. So I think this is going to be whetting the appetite of a lot of shmup fans have been looking for this for a very long time. I'm absolutely a fan of it. I can see myself playing it for a very long time into the future, and I can see it sort of sliding in alongside stuff like Blue Revolver and Zeroranger. Blue Revolver, Zeroranger, Gunvein, I can definitely see them in that sort of tier as like top tier Western made shmups, because yeah, there's a lot to learn from, because I think the game is just fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to what Boghog does next. Adios.
Thank you to the $5 patrons: 100, Dingo, Another Joe, Anthony A, Aaron Solis, O, Ben, Bettino, Blair STG, Borgie22, Brian Shiver, Chris Yusupovich, Chronic Burnout 3, Climbing Coyote, Cooks and Soup, Corey Mark, Death Audio, Darren Griffin, Disco Stockslayer, DJ420 Praise It, Eric H, Fantaside, FCK, Bull Set, Retro Schmupper, Houseu, J, JLab, JBRPG, John Kelly, Gameboy Gru, K, K2, KZ, Khalil Reedy, Contain, Larridge, Malaise, Matthew Deragish, Maz, Megadeth859, Minung, Mechalin, Michael Stum, Mitchell Y, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron Neon Dagger Games, Oakland Googles, Psycho Blizzard, Rattlecap, Raoul, Real Scheme, Rip Mason, Wolf015, Sarah, Scanline City, Seesaw SDG, 7 Overdose, Shmup Junkie, Sarah Pong, Steve Fiction, The Boot Rex, The Dirty Screech, The N1, The Old Bensta, TRM, Sugumo, Twilight EX, Yutakoi Roots, YB Legs, Boghog, and Izakaya. Thanks for watching.